Now, doesn't time race by? Today marks the passing of the first third of the year. And guess what? You actually haven't finished paying your taxes yet. It sounds awful, doesn't it? Everything that you've earned from your daily graft so far this year is actually gone to pay your annual tax. And let me tell you, you ain't done yet. The Australian Taxpayers Alliance, which is an excellent organisation, has done the numbers on just how much we working stiffs get to give the government every single year as a proportion of our pay packet. As the report points out, calculating income tax is as easy as visiting the ATO website. You punch in your salary and bang, you know exactly how much tax you're up for. But you see, the tax system's worse than that. The Aussie workers are not only taxed on their income, they're actually taxed on their spending, their savings, and sometimes they're even taxed on their taxes. So here's a trigger warning for you sensitive types at home. These figures will shock you. And I hope they appall you too, so you can get in touch with your Member of Parliament and tell them enough is enough. Let's take the average Victorian worker who earned the 2019 average income of $63,440. Now, they cost their employer about an additional $10,000 or so in superannuation, in payroll tax and other benefits. So if you build that into a bundle, the total government grab of the $73,000 is actually more than 40 grand. Now that's a whopping 55% tax rate. So if you put that in another perspective, you only need to work until the end of July before you actually stop paying the government and you start paying yourself. Yippee, I can hear you cheer. Only 3 more months to go. And of course it gets worse if you actually choose to do something you enjoy, like smoking. The average smoker coughs up, no pun intended, another $5,200 in tax. And if you insure your home, well, you're actually going to pay tax in the form of stamp duties, and then you're going to pay GST on the stamp duty tax. That's a tax on a tax. And don't get me started on alcohol taxes or defacto wealth taxes that are built into water and council rates. We've got land tax. And then there's those levies, which are always temporary, never permanent, but they never seem to go away. Wow, I wonder why. Well, the list of opportunities that governments have seized to keep you broke goes on and on and on. In total, the Taxpayers Alliance has identified 125 separate taxes at the local, state and federal levels, and most of them are so sneaky you don't even realise the government has their grabby hands in your pocket for most of the year. So if you're a working Joe or Josephine and wonder why you're struggling to keep your own budget in the black, it's probably not you. It's greedy government keeping you broke. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Emily Dye from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. Emily, thanks so much for your time tonight. Tell me, how much work did you have to put in to identify just how much tax Australian workers are being hit up for?
Oh man, this has been quite the project. It started out as, I thought it would be 30 pages, I'd get this done in a month. And it actually turned out to being closer to 110 pages, and it took me over 6 months to complete this report. I actually did not realize just how much tax we pay in Australia and how many taxes there are. So adding those up ended up being a lot more of a project than I was expecting.
Well, you identified 125 of these sneaky taxes. Now, some of them are pretty obvious, right? You know, you've got a wealth tax built into your water bill or your income tax and stuff. But how far deep did you have to get in to uncover the whole 125 of them? And what are some of the sneakier ones?
Yeah, so Henry Tax Review was the one that actually originally found that 125 number. It is actually quite difficult to find those taxes. You look at revenue, government revenues, and they just have this section that says other, and we don't know what that is. Some good examples are insurance taxes. You'd think that the Australian government would want us buying insurance so that the government doesn't have to come in and bail us out when something bad happens. But we're taxing insurance. And all of these sales taxes, like the insurance tax, were supposed to go away with GST. But instead, we've got, again, that tax on a tax with the insurance taxes, where first you pay the GST, and then you have to pay the insurance tax on top of it. Same thing happens with customs duties, since there's all of these taxes on tax as a result of GST and these things not getting repealed.
And it's crazy, every time we hear about discussion about tax reform, it's always been about increasing taxes effectively. Like, for example, we have a stamp duty on homes, which is outrageous, quite frankly, and stops people moving into appropriate homes. But the government wants to, or the New South Wales government and other governments want to have a land tax regime for the ordinary homeowners. But we already have this in the form of, in South Australia, an emergency services levy on all our water, and our rates bills are taxed according to the value of the property. I mean, how much can the average Australian put up with if they want to be aspirational and they're not able to take home more than 50% of their own income?
Yeah, we really are boiled frogs in a sense. We keep getting all of these taxes on top of each other, and you don't notice it. We get our income tax, and that's obvious, but then it's all of those taxes on expenditures. And a lot of times you're not paying that tax directly. So say you're a renter, you're like, stamp duty doesn't affect me, land tax doesn't affect me, council rates aren't a big deal. But in reality, your landlord is passing those taxes right down to you, and as a result, you're still paying it. So it doesn't really matter whether you rent or you own, you're still going to end up, to some extent, paying these taxes.
And the crazy thing is, Emily, that as overtaxed as we are, we've still got a government, or successive governments, that can't live within their means. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars that they don't have, which is sort of suggests that in the future, taxes are going to have to rise again. Now, I don't know how much the regular Aussie can put up with this until they opt out and say, no, thanks, I'll just sit at home and do nothing and get money from the poor fools who decide to work.
Yeah, that would be the rational decision. And I think we should be concerned about the deficit, and we should make sure that we're, in a sense, paying for tax cuts and not spending more than we bring in. But a lot of times, these taxes aren't bringing in much money. We get about 90% of our revenue from only 10 taxes. So what about the other 115? They're not really bringing in revenue. They're doing things like trying to change behavior, which isn't necessarily the government's role in this. They should be funding our services and nothing else. When they get so much into changing behavior, they actually hurt the people that are the most vulnerable, like you said about the tobacco tax. That's a small group of people. It's about 11% of the Australian population. But if you're in the bottom quintile and you're making $25,000 a year, that's 20% of your income. That's huge. That's really affecting people's daily lives. And that's something the government should pay attention to. And they are handing money back out to those exact same people that are in the bottom quintile because they don't have enough money to survive on. So it's this churn of money that is so unnecessary.
And it goes into the whole, what is the role of government? What is the responsibilities? Why do we have this money churn where they clip the ticket to provide, jobs for so many public servants and so on? From the Australian Taxpayers Alliance perspective, what needs to be taken to deliver tax justice here in Australia?
Yeah, I think first we need to be cutting, and then we need to be worrying about government revenue. Once we cut and once we give more money back to people, the government's actually going to have to spend less. One way of looking at it is, if there were no taxes, someone that's making the minimum wage will get about a 60% bonus. They'd be making over $60,000 essentially in real earnings. That's a lot of money. Someone that's on the average income, that's about 45%. Again, a lot of money. And we should cut the taxes first. And once we've cut the taxes, we won't have to spend as much making sure people aren't starving. People do have enough to survive on.
Yeah, this is one of the critical things, though, is governments do need money, but they should stick to their knitting. We don't need to have a $1 billion or $1.5 billion two taxpayer-funded networks, for example. We don't need the advertising programs that go on. We don't need some of the welfare programs. If people had more individual and personal responsibility and were more entrusted to spend their money that they work for appropriately, then I think the country would be in a much better place.
Exactly. And a lot of times we're really spending money where it doesn't need to be spent. Great example are all those bureaucrats making over $1 million. Another good example is all the corporate welfare. A lot of times it feels like the companies with the best lobbyists are the ones that win, and they get these handouts and they get these subsidies. We've given out a lot of subsidies during COVID. Those people don't necessarily need that.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and we've got to keep drawing attention to it, and that's what the Australian Taxpayers Alliance is doing. Emily Dye, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thanks so much for having me on.